Good afternoon. It's Gary Sly in the Legacy of Handmade Objects. I'm actually filming a little early this week. It's Friday afternoon, just before the Memorial Day weekend. I'm going away to Savannah, and I wanted to try to get a episode in before I left, so I'm here in the shop. And if the door doesn't swing open, I'll have a few minutes to talk to you today about hoops and frames and things like that. It's a topic that has come up a number of times here in the shop over the last week. Not only new stitchers, but even folks who've been at it for a while often have questions about what I recommend and what are good ways to secure your fabric as you work on your stitching. I should say at the very beginning, I'm a huge advocate for stitching in hand. I don't like, whenever I can get away with it, I don't like using hoops or frames. As a person who frames cross-stitch pieces, I hate the lines and the distortions that are caused, especially by hoops. And so about the only time you'll find me using a hoop or a frame is if I'm doing hand quilting, which I use a great big hoop for that, or if I'm doing embroidery like a crewel piece or something like that where I have fancy stitches that extend over larger periods of the fabric, and of course I need to have the fabric nice and tight when I do that. So I'm going to be working on a crewel piece here in the shop, an old kit that somebody asked me to work on from the 1970s, and I'll be pulling out the hoops and working from there. But generally speaking, if you come into the shop and I'm working, you will almost always see me stitching in hand. I'm back working on this wonderful piece from China, and all that I do when I'm stitching most of the time with cross stitch is I simply roll the piece up from the back so that as I'm working, the only surface that I'm really touching with my hands on any regular basis is the back. So you can see I'm rolling it up from the back, and about the only part of it that I'm going to touch with any regularity is the back, and then I can get to the section that I want to stitch and work on it from there. I like working in hand because I can pick a piece up and lay it down very quickly. And again, I have a prejudice towards it because I have many times tried to frame pieces that have really awful marks that are hard to get out of. And people will tell me they have foolproof methods for doing that, but I'm sorry, there's still times when I frame a piece that I can see the hoop marks on it. Given that that's my take on things, I'm talking about my preferences. It doesn't mean that it's the best way for everybody else. Some people, when they sit down to do cross stitch or needlepoint, really want to see a surface as tight as a drum, and that helps them to envision what they're doing, and it helps their stitches to be more even. So certainly I endorse that if that's what you want, and I'm going to talk about some ideas in a minute. When I do needlepoint, same thing. I always stitch in hand. Occasionally I've gotten pieces that somebody else had started that were already on a frame. You may have seen me working on a Christmas stocking recently that was already on a frame, but I tend to like to do it in hand. This is a chair cushion that I'm working on from some William Morris designs. And you can see I've already needle pointed the flower that's going to go in the middle, and now I'm working on the background. Now I will say, especially with needle pointing, you've heard me say this before, if you don't use the basket weave stitch, if you don't stitch on the diagonal up and down when you're working on large sections of needlepoint, you will find that it gets distorted or kind of wonky because all your stitches are going in the same direction. So there are advocates of always using a frame when you do needlepoint so that you don't get that distortion in your final design work. And certainly, again, if that's the preference that you have, I would endorse that. I've done 4 of these chair cushions from beginning all the way to being completed and put it on the chair, and I've never had that much trouble with the distortion because I do the large background areas in basket weave. So, I'm getting my prejudices out of the way early. I like the portability of stitching in hand. When I started out, I was really only doing things like crewel embroidery. I didn't know cross stitch existed at that point, and so hoops, of course, were the way I started and the way many stitchers start. Some of you might have seen these old metal hoops that have the cork in the middle. They can be quite effective. You need to be real careful with these not to leave them on your fabric very long though, or you can have rust marks. With any of your hoops, if you're concerned about whether they hold the fabric tight enough, one trick I learned from an embroidery class that I took in Chicago a number of years back with the Embroidery Guild of America is to get binder's tape and completely wind it around the inside hoop of your stitching hoop, and that helps to keep your fabric in place. So, those old metal ones are still around. Some people like these plastic hoops with the tightener, and they come in a variety of sizes. Certainly no problem with those, except the plastic can be a little slippery. So this might be a prime example of where you might want to put some binder's tape on the inside to help secure your fabric and keep it from moving so easily. There's a lot of decorative hoops that you can find these days that are nice because when you finish, you've got, if your design fits into the design area, you've got a finished piece that you can hang on the wall. And this is one of those pretty little decorative ones. It's actually made out of plastic, but it's got a rim in the middle. And so if you put something in there, it's going to be held quite tightly. And then when you finish, you don't even have to take it out of the hoop. You can hang it on your wall just like that if your piece is small enough that it fits within the hoop. Now, I'll tell you the one I like the least and the one that I would not recommend are these with the little springy handles that come in and out. Unless you're doing a real small, quick piece that doesn't require any tension at all, I find these to be kind of frustrating. Now, the top of the line hoops here in my shop, not necessarily everybody's top of the line, but the best ones that I have in the shop are made by the Morgan Company. They come in a variety of sizes. They've got a really nice, strong tightening mechanism here, and they have a rim in the middle, and then fitting over that rim, if you can see it, is a ridge. So they fit together very tightly. If you're somebody who likes a hoop that won't come loose, that won't loosen up while you're stitching, if you want a really tight surface, not just for cross stitch, but for any of your stitching ideas, I highly recommend the Morgan hoops. They're a little more expensive. They come in a variety of sizes, but if you're going to use a hoop, they're certainly a good option. Now, aside from hoops, there's all kinds of different frames made that people can pick up and buy. This is an older product that I have here in the shop, but you can see it's a frame that somebody would use, and it comes with a little attachment that you can put under your legs, and you sit on it to hold it in place, and so it's nice and sturdy and reliable. I still remember going to Liberty's department store in London and watching a woman doing needlepoint using a frame, and she tutted and fussed at me because when I do needlepoint, I only use one hand. And she was saying if I were using a frame on a stand or on some kind of mechanism like this, I could use both hands, which would make my needlepoint go much more quickly. I'm not usually about speed, so that doesn't matter to me very much. The frames come in a couple varieties. Some of them, fairly inexpensive ones, have a little slit in the wood, and you just simply open them up. You take this apart, open that up, put your fabric into the slit, tighten it back down again, and then roll your project onto the frame like this. These come in a variety of widths, so you can usually find one wide enough that'll suit just about any piece that you're working on. If your piece is wider than your frame and you still want to use it, just simply fold it in on the sides, and as you work your way across, you can unfold that side and fold this side. But remember that when you do that, you are making some pretty hard folds in your finished fabric and in your finished product, and so they may not look quite as nice as you'd like them to. Another system of the frames are the ones that come with a piece of fabric, and instead of putting them into the little slits in the wood, you would sew. You do a quick little drop stitch and sew your fabric onto both ends, and again use the rods here to tighten it and roll your project along as you're working your way through like that. I haven't used them, but I know that some people really swear by the big metal Lowry frames that have become quite popular recently. The nice thing about those is you can stand them next to where you're stitching. You can pull them up close to where you are, and your stitching surface is going to be right there at your hands. And again, with a stand where you don't have to be holding with one hand, you can work with both hands and probably move yourself a little quicker. I typically have a few standing kind of things here in the shop. I don't have a lot right now, but this is one of those that you could either sit on a table next to you, in front of you, or you could put this under your legs and still have space to maneuver the frame and put your piece in it. I guess I should have thought ahead enough to put a piece in one of these, actually, to give you a little bit more of a picture of what it looks like. But I think you get the idea. Your stitching surface is going to be in here. You're going to be working back and forth with your needles. One other thing to think about in terms of frames, especially if you're working with a darker fabric, is that you can put a light behind it, and it's much easier to see what you're doing. I know people kind of bemoan the trials and tribulations of stitching on black fabric or dark blue fabric. Any kind of dark fabric, it's going to be hard to see the holes unless you have some light source behind the work as well as out here where you need it in order to be able to see. The other thing that people talk to me a lot about in stitching, whether they're still doing it and have given it up or whatever, is not being able to see. Eyesight does come and go as we get older, and I'm fortunate that I can just take my glasses off and I can still see very well up close, but that's not true for everyone. But if you have a light source, you could attach it to your frame. You can really work all sorts of different methods, the ones that are best for you. I hope that folks who really love to stitch are not finding themselves giving up on stitching just because they can't see anymore. Now, I know a lot of people use that as an excuse because they really didn't enjoy stitching all that much to begin with. They tried it. Rather than say, I don't like doing it, they will say, I just can't see anymore. And that's fair. That's fair. It's not me to question what your excuses may be. But if you really love it and you are finding that you're less able to see, your light sources are really going to be key. Natural light, of course, is always best. So if you've got a nice sunny window, or I have a friend up in South Carolina who actually had an outdoor kind of stitching area in the round, just so that she would have a place to be able to stitch in the daylight. But of course we don't want to be restricted by that, so there's some wonderful lights that you can get these days. They're rechargeable often. Many times they don't have a lot of heat associated with them. I know here in Florida when we stitch in the summer, we don't want anything to make it any hotter than it is already. Um, but I hope that it's not the case, that you get to the point where the light source is not as good as it should be and you have to give up stitching. Um, Eyesight is another issue, I know, and you may have to have um, magnifying glasses in addition to your regular prescription glasses sometimes in order to see. And I'm not unaware of the frustrations that that creates for some people. I just know that if I get to the point where I can't see the stitch, you're going to have a really grumpy old man on your hands. I've already warned my kids, if that happens, I guess that'll be the time for me to write my biography by recording it so that it can be recorded in some way. But I hope to be stitching as long as I can. So, that's kind of some of the answers that I give people when they come in the shop and they're looking for options on what to do about how to secure their work and how to make it most effective in what they're doing. I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. By the time I post this, it'll probably be over. But I wish you well. I hope your stitching projects for the summer are coming together and you're finding some things you can work on. And as always, it's great to see you and hear your comments and know that you're out there. So this is Gary Sly, The Legacy of Handmade Objects.